Just a reminder to our Speculating Wildly About Crime listeners, this is for entertainment purposes only and solely the thoughts and opinions of our team. We do invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Welcome to Speculating Wildly About Crime. I'm Cindy and I'll be your host tonight. We will be diving into the mysterious disappearance of Natalee Holloway, a case that has captured true crime fans for nearly 2 decades. I've listened to many podcasts on this, as well as read the book, Aruba, The Tragic Untold Story of Natalee Holloway and Corruption in Paradise by Dave Holloway, which is Natalee's dad. I do want to shout out to one podcast in particular called People Are the Worst podcast. It is hosted by 2 women that went to high school with Natalee, but were just a year behind her. They have a more personal insight into Natalee and her case and her family, as well as how it affected their community. And I'll list my resources and all the podcasts that I listen to in the show notes so you can listen along with me. I chose this story because my family has traveled to Aruba multiple times. And whenever I bring up Aruba and how safe I feel it is, someone always mentions this case. So I wanted to know more about the story. And for my swag pack, I guarantee that there will be aspects of the story that you can all relate to. Natalee Holloway was an 18-year-old honor student from Mountain Brook, Alabama. She was on the dance team, she volunteered around her community, and she was active in her church. She had just graduated from Mountain Brook High School in May 2005 with a 4.0 GPA and was going to attend the University of Alabama on a pre-med scholarship that following fall. She was described as intelligent, kind, and beautiful, both inside and out, by those who knew her. Natalee was an exceptional, high-achieving student with a bright future ahead of her. In the days after her graduation, Natalee was going on a senior class trip to Aruba with around 124 classmates from her high school. This was not a school-sponsored event, but rather was planned by students and their families. Dave Holloway, Natalee's dad, told interviewers that he had tried to prevent Natalee from going on this trip, but he had ultimately conceded when her mom signed her up. Her mom, Beth Twitty, had talked to Natalee about how to be safe on her trip and felt that Natalee deserved it since she had worked so hard her senior year. This type of post-graduation trip was a long-standing tradition for the senior class at Mountain Brook High. The students were excited to enjoy some sun, sand, and freedom before heading off to college in the fall. The group was staying at the Holiday Inn Resort in Nord, which is on Palm Beach. The class trip was chaperoned by 7 adults who routinely checked on the students to ensure everything was safe and accounted for. However, it was said that the chaperones were not there to track the students' every move. They would only check in with them about once a day. For the most part, the students were able to roam free all over Aruba. And since the drinking age in Aruba is 18, that also meant that many of the nights were spent at the bars and at the clubs. It was a new experience for them with no worries of being carded, even if some of them were not quite 18 yet. Speaking from experience, when my family was down there in Aruba in 2022, my daughter was 18 years old and her cousin was 16. Neither of them were ever asked for ID when ordering drinks at the bar. And they both were responsible and never drank when they weren't with us, but they easily could have if they had chose to. Seniors had enjoyed nearly a week of beaches, casinos, and bars. They were enjoying their last night in Aruba. Around 1:30 a.m. on May 30th, 2005, Natalee was seen leaving the Carlos and Charlie's nightclub with 3 young local men. Joran Vandersloot, who was 17 years old at the time, and brothers Deepak and Sadish Kalpo, who were 21 and 18 respectively. Natalee never made it back to her hotel, and she failed to show up for a scheduled flight home the next morning. When Natalee didn't show up for the scheduled departure, the chaperones began interrogating the students, trying to determine Natalee's whereabouts. They packed up her belongings, hoping she had simply overslept and would catch up to the group. However, as the students boarded the bus, they reported Natalee's disappearance to Natalee's parents because she still had not shown up. Beth Twitty and Dave Holloway individually rushed to the island with family and friends. Beth was able to get on a private jet. So they were both there within hours of Natalee's disappearance. Despite their pleas, the Aruban police initially dismissed their concerns and suggesting that Natalie had likely just gotten drunk and would eventually show up. So typical, as we have seen in many missing persons cases. However, Beth and Dave refused to accept this passive response from the authorities. They aggressively pressed the Aruban police to take the disappearance seriously and launch a thorough investigation. Beth and Dave became deeply involved, traveling to Aruba multiple times during this time to search for clues and put pressure on the government to find out what happened to their daughter. As soon as Beth had arrived in Aruba, she began her own investigation. She interviewed the classmates, chaperones, and the hotel staff. Beth found out that Natalie was last seen at the bar Carlos and Charlie's. So Beth started there. She got surveillance videos from the bar. While viewing it, she saw Natalie with some local boys. One was very well known by the bar manager and was identified as Joran Vandersloot. Beth gave this information to the Aruban police, and she went with the police to Joran's home. When she confronted Joran, he first said he didn't know anything about Natalie or who she was. But then eventually he remembered. He said that he and his friends Deepak and Satish Kalpo left Carlos and Charlie's with Natalie in Deepak's car. She yelled Aruba to her classmates as they drove by. She told Joran that she wanted to see the sharks before she left Aruba. So the boys drove her up to Arashi Beach near the California Lighthouse. Then they dropped her off at the Holiday Inn around 2 a.m. Joran said that Natalie fell getting out of the car and she refused his help. But as he was driving away, he saw a man in a black shirt, like those the security guards were wearing, come up to Natalie, presumably to help. Put a pin in that, and we'll come back to this shortly. So let me tell you a little bit about Joran, and I'll probably say his name 1,000 different ways, but he's not a good guy, so I don't care if I get his name correct. So Joran Vandersloot was a 17-year-old Dutch national attending school in Aruba. However, he had told Natalie and many of her classmates that he was 19 years old and was just visiting the island. But he and his prominent family lived on the island. His father, Paulos Vandersloot, was a justice official in Aruba and had many friends in the government. Paulos also was applying to be a judge, and his mother, Anita, was an art teacher at the school. Joran had a history of troubling behavior and run-ins with the law even before Natalie's case. He had previously been arrested for burglary and was known to have a volatile temper and a tendency towards violence. He was known around the island as the guy that would often interact with the young, pretty tourists. He also frequented the casinos with his father, even though the legal age to gamble was 18. Now, Deepak and Satish Kalpo were from Suriname, which is a country located on the northeastern coast of South America. They lived in Aruba and didn't seem to have any type of criminal record prior to Natalie's disappearance. But that was about all that I could find on them, other than what was related to Natalie's case. So by midday on Monday, May 30th, the Aruban authorities had launched an extensive search and investigation. 50 Dutch Marines, since Aruba is a Dutch colony, were deployed to search the shorelines as well as about 1 to 2 miles out into the ocean. The Aruban government gave thousands of employees the day off to search, and many tourists in Aruba for vacation took time out to search as well. And jets were brought in to find freshly dug graves. So police spent about $3 million on search efforts over the course of the whole search, but Natalie was not found. But on June 5th of 2005, police arrested 2 former Allegra Hotel security guards, Nick John and Abraham Jones. Allegra Hotel was a few hotels down from Holiday Inn and was currently under renovation. The men were released a week later with no charges. And actually, well, this is a good time. I wanted to maybe bring up the map of Aruba so you can get an idea of how big Aruba is and where all of these locations are. I have 2 maps of Aruba here. This one is probably good to see the whole map. So Aruba is 21 miles long and only 6 miles wide. And then if you notice this part in green here, this is the national park. That'll come up in our story later, but you can see how much that area takes up in Aruba. So now we're talking about there in Nord. So the names are a little bit hard to read here, but most of the story took place on Palm Beach, which is on the uppermost point here in Aruba. And again, these letters blur a little as we go farther out, but the Holiday Inn was here in this midpoint, and Carlos and Charlie's would probably be right in that same vicinity. It's definitely within walking distance of the hotel. And then they were going to go up to Arashi Beach, which is this beach at the top point here. And then there's the lighthouse there as well at the top little point. And the Allegra, which I don't believe is on this map, I think it's changed names since then, would have been a couple hotels down. This whole shoreline now is nothing but hotels. As you get a little bit farther up by Arashi, there is more open area and houses and such, but pretty much from the point down to the bottom here in Eagle Beach and a little bit farther beyond, all of this is hotels and resorts. In Aruba now, they've banned any more hotels from going up on Palm or Eagle Beach. So that kind of gives you a lay of the land that this isn't very big. If the whole island is 20 some miles, this is only a couple miles here or there.
Can I ask a question about the Allegra Hotel, Cindy?
Sure.
So you said that it was under construction at the time. Do you know if it was like open for people to stay there, or was it like closed down fully?
I'm not sure. I know when we were just there this last February, they keep a security guard on the grounds at all times, regardless of if it's open to the public or not. We didn't stay anywhere near this, but where we did stay, there was a new building going up, and there was one gentleman that just literally sat on a picnic table all day, every day, all night, every night. Sure, it wasn't the same person, but just sitting there watching things. So my guess is that these security guards, even though it was under renovation, they were still there watching over it. A few days after the security guards had been let go, on June 9th, this was the first time that Vandersloot and the Cowpo brothers were arrested. In addition to these 3 young men and the 2 security guards, they also brought in a few other suspects based on Vandersloot and the Cowpo brothers' stories that were changing by the minute. So I'll try to outline both the stories and the arrests here, but I wanted to talk a little bit first about Aruban law to keep that in mind as we go through the case. In Aruba, police can arrest somebody based on serious suspicion. Then they must increasingly meet an evidential burden to continue to hold them. So Aruba authorities can initially hold a suspect in custody for up to 3 days and 16 hours. Not sure where that 16 hours comes from, but before they have to be put up before a judge. And then the judge can then order up to 8 days of remand, and that can be renewed. The maximum period a suspect can be held before being brought before a judge is around 19 days, where in contrast here, we can only hold a suspect for 48 hours. The 3 young men were arrested. This is when the second story comes up. So this time the boys say that Natalie and Joran were dropped off at the Marriott Hotel, which again was between Arashi Beach and the lighthouse and the Holiday Inn. And Joran said that he and Natalie were alone on the beach, but that he didn't hurt her. Then there was an additional arrest of Steve Crows, and that happened on June 17th. Crows was a DJ on a tour boat called Tattoo, and he worked with Deepak at an internet cafe. Deepak had asked Steve to provide an alibi for him in relation to the first story that they had told. And Steve did provide that alibi, but by that time the story had changed, and they did look into more with Crows, but he was released without having any charges held against him. Then the next day, Paulus Vandersloot was brought in for questioning, and he was not allowed to see his son while he was in jail. And again, he was released with nothing. So from here, the Cowpo brothers were released on July 4th, again with no charges, but Joran was still in jail at this time. And also the search is still going on, and people are reporting sightings of Natalie. They're coming up with other things that they see in the water, and the case is starting to gain worldwide attention. So of course, Joran comes up with a third story, and he puts the blame on the Cowpo brothers. And in this rendition of his story, he says that he was dropped off at home and the Cowpo brothers drove off with Natalie. And what happened after that, he has no idea. This story was quickly discounted by police because it seemed that Joran was retaliating against the brothers because they were pointing the fingers at him. So then 60 days after the Cowpo brothers were released, Vandersloot was released again due to lack of evidence. I want to stop here and mention that the Holloway family was getting a ton of press with Natalie's disappearance. And it occurred against the backdrop of a media landscape that was increasingly focused on sensational, high profile missing person cases involving young, attractive white women. Just a year earlier, in 2004, the term missing white women syndrome had been coined by veteran journalist Gwen Ifill. Ifill observed that the media tended to devote disproportionate attention and coverage to missing white women, while largely ignoring cases involving people of color. And we have seen this numerous times since this as well. Another interesting note, so Natalie's case got so much attention that Brett Favre, who was at the time, I believe, the Green Bay Packer quarterback, heard that Joran had a poster of him on his wall. So Favre called Beth and offered to come to Aruba to talk to Joran in hopes that he would tell Favre the truth. Favre also said he was going to be bringing An Ming, who was the famous basketball player, and Peyton Manning down with him. Brett felt connected to the case because he was from Mississippi and Natalie lived in Mississippi until the 8th grade when her parents were divorced. He just didn't want Beth to alert the media of his visit. But unfortunately, due to management concerns, he had to renege on the offer. So somewhere in this time frame as well, the Kalpoe brothers were secretly recorded by a private investigator. And according to the Huffington Post article, the recording was edited in a misleading way to make it seem like the brothers had something to do with the disappearance of Natalee Holloway. This recording aired on an episode of Dr. Phil. The Kalpoe brothers later sued Dr. Phil for defamation in 2006, but they lost that case. Then shortly after that, on August 16th, the Kalpoe brothers are rearrested on suspicion of rape and murder. And a third man named Freddie was arrested for taking inappropriate pictures of a 16-year-old girl and having relations with her. This was before Natalie, and it is unclear if he had any connection to Natalie's case, but he must have been brought in for questioning regardless. We come back to Dr. Phil for a minute on October 5th, 2005. He announced that Natalie was alive and was being forced to work as a sex slave. Shortly after that, Beth received a voicemail on her cell that said, "Mom, come help me," with other voices in the background. She reported it to the FBI.
Cindy, did you say Dr. Phil said that she was alive?
Yes.
Okay.
Where did he get
So-
this information?
I did not find that information anywhere, but apparently Dr. Phil just knows these things. Beth reported this to the FBI, but I couldn't find any info on it beyond that. And it was in Dave's book that this had happened, but no results had come in by the time that book was published. So there are a lot of theories about the sex trafficking possibility, with Aruba being only about 20 miles away from Colombia and being very close to Venezuela. It's used as a good place to find women. Beth, during her investigation, found out about chawler houses, which is what Aruba calls crack houses, and also known for having unsavory characters. So someone had told her that Natalie was being held in one of these chawler houses and that she could buy her back. So Beth, with her team of people, and Dave and many others, went to this chawler house and kicked open the door in the hopes to find Natalie. However, Natalie wasn't there either. Back to Joran. In March 2006, during a Fox News interview, Joran relays another story. Fourth one, if you're keeping track at home, he claims Natalie wanted to have sex with him, but he didn't want to because he didn't have a condom. Such a nice guy. Joran wanted to leave because he had school the next morning, but Natalie wanted to stay on the beach. So Joran called Satish to pick him up around 3 a.m. and they left Natalie sitting on the beach. Joran was ashamed to have left a girl on the beach who then went missing. So that is why he didn't say anything at first. And he thought she would turn up. There were cell phone records that does show calls between Joran and Satish that night, but Satish's attorney disputes this story. Shortly after March, there was a man named Jeffrey arrested on criminal offenses related to dealing narcotics. The police thought he may have been involved in Natalie's disappearance. However, he was also released a few days later with no more information. Now, in May of 2006, Guido Weaver, a son of a former Aruban politician, was detained in the Netherlands on suspicion of assisting in the abducting and battering and killing of Holloway. However, he was released a week later. So in June of 2006, Dave Holloway, again, Natalie's dad, files a wrongful death suit against the Kalpoe brothers, but it is dismissed a year later due to jurisdiction issues. Quite a few years later, now in November of 2007, almost 2.5 years after Natalie's disappearance, Vandersloot and the Kalpoe brothers are rearrested under suspicion of manslaughter and bodily harm leading to Natalie's death. However, once again, they are released due to lack of evidence. The police dropped all charges in December 2007 due to lack of evidence. But don't worry, it's not over yet, folks. In February 2008, Peter R. DeVries released hidden cameras of Vandersloot smoking weed and confessing to someone, his fifth story of what happened to Natalie. This time, Jorn and Natalie are on the beach when she starts shaking and convulsing and becomes unresponsive. He tried to revive her, but he couldn't. So he called a friend who told him to go home, and the friend would dispose of the body. This friend discounts the story because he says he was in the Netherlands at school at the time and couldn't have helped Jorn. A month later, Natalie's case is reopened and they try to arrest Vandersloot again. But the appeals court says the tape statements were not consistent with the case. Jorn denies the statements on the tape, saying he was high when he said all of those things. So Jorn loves attention, and in November 2008, he is interviewed for Fox again. He gives yet another story, number 6 for those counting, and Jorn said he sold Natalie into sexual slavery to this unknown man. He was paid about $10,000 when she was taken and to keep quiet. Also, Jorn had audio of Paulo, his dad, being aware of his son's involvement with human trafficking. Paulos apparently paid off 2 police officers to keep the secret so she could be taken to Venezuela and Jorn wouldn't get into trouble. However, this audio was later disputed by a Dutch newspaper who said it was actually Jorn trying to speak in a lower tone. And Jorn eventually tracks these statements in the interview. And Jorn must have been getting bored because in 2010, another story comes out, number 7. He claims he left Natalie's body in a marsh in Aruba. The police don't believe this one at all because the names, locations, and times just didn't make any sense. Around this time, February 2010, Paulos Vandersloot dies of a heart attack at age 57. Sometimes karma does catch up with people. Since Jorn's dad had died, and he's all up in his feels, he decides to come clean to Beth Holloway. He called her lawyer, John Kelly, and said he would reveal the location of Natalie's body in exchange for $250,000, but he needed $25,000 up front. Kelly met with Jorn and gave him $10,000, and then Beth wired him the additional $15,000. He said Natalie had died of an accidental fall and he had just disposed of her body. Her body was in the foundation of a house that he and his dad were building. But the house that he was talking about hadn't been built yet, and the property wasn't even ready at the time. This story, too, was a lie, but he felt entitled to this money since all of the trouble that the Holloway family had given him over the past few years. But later, he was charged with extortion and wire fraud due to this. We're still not done yet. So now, while Natalie Holloway's case still remained unsolved, Vandersloot took the money that he had extorted from Beth and her family and went to commit another horrific crime in Peru. On May 30th, exactly 5 years after Natalie's disappearance, Vandersloot murdered 21-year-old Peruvian woman Stephanie Flores in his hotel room in Lima. Vandersloot had met Flores at a poker tournament and brought her back to his room. Stephanie was on the computer when some instant message or something popped up, and it was related to Jorn and Natalie Holloway. She questioned Jorn about it. Then he got very angry and he brutally beat Flores to death. He got up the next morning with her still in the room and went and got 2 coffees and some bread to bring back to his room. He can then be seen leaving again with his backpack. Stephanie's body was found 3 days later, brutally stabbed and wrapped in a blanket. Joran by then had fled to Chile before being apprehended and extradited to Peru within a few days of Stephanie's death. Joran again claimed innocence at first, but then confessed 4 days later. So in 2012, Vandersloot was sentenced to 28 years in prison for Flores' murder.
8 years? That's it?
28, yep. I'll mention this a little later, but Peru has a max sentence of 35 years. That's their life sentence.
Why did they not at least give him the max?
So at this point, he said he would provide more information on Natalie's case if he could be extradited to Aruba to serve his time. However, Peru and Aruba do not have an extradition agreement, so he is left to be in a Peruvian prison. And I did a little research. Peruvian prisons are severely overcrowded. They have chaotic environments where prisoners are essentially governing themselves with rampant drug use, prostitution, and the spread of infectious diseases. The conditions have been described as breeding further criminality, and there's been many human rights groups that have been trying to shut down Peruvian prisons.
Do we know what Aruban prisons are like?
There is only one, and it also isn't great, but you have a view of the ocean, so it's better.
I'm just wondering what his reasoning was to make this request.
He probably still thought he had friends in the Aruba government as well, so that could be. So at this point, a day after Joran confesses to killing Stephanie, Dave Holloway petitions to have Natalie declared legally dead. This is not something obviously that they want to do, but they need to settle some accounts and get at least some smidgen of closure while still keeping hopes alive that she may come back. Even with Joran in prison, the stories are still coming out. Number 9, in August 2017, the Oxygen True Crime docuseries, The Disappearance of Natalie Holloway, debuts. This documentary, which I have not yet watched, but I believe I listened to a podcast on it. This featured John Ludwig. Ludwig became friends with Vandersloot when he heard he was an accused murderer. So you can tell what kind of guy Ludwig is from that. Ludwig claimed that he and Joran were very close, and in 2010, when things seemed to be heating up again due to Stephanie's murder, Joran paid him $1,500 to dig up Natalie's buried remains, crush her bones, and burn her skull. So apparently, the story Joran told Ludwig was that he killed Natalie and had his dad help him get rid of the body. His dad brought a burlap bag with him, but Natalie didn't fit in the bag, so they dismembered her and then buried her body. Ludwig went with Joran and dug up Natalie, and he even took a few bone fragments as trophies. Then they brought her body to a crematorium where one of them had some type of connection, and then they disposed of her ashes. The bones that Ludwig had were tested and found to not be Natalie, as most of them were animal bones. He was cooperating with police and tried to lead them to the cactus or a cactus in the national park that Natalie had been buried under, but he didn't have any luck to find that specific cactus. And obviously, as I showed you originally, that national park takes up about 20% of Aruba. So it is a big area to look for. And when you're looking for a cactus in a virtual desert area, it's pretty hard to find that specific cactus. But at this point, the Aruban police had been very, very much more helpful and had provided Dave Holloway and his team with some officers and any equipment that they needed to do a thorough search of the national park. But again, they were hoping to find even remnants of a burlap bag or something, but they did not find anything. So Ludwig was such a piece of shit that he was kicked off of the Nancy Grace show for stating that Stephanie Flores could have been avoided being murdered by Joran by just leaving and not mentioning Natalie Holloway. And Nancy Grace actually threw him off of her show because he was victim blaming. The one time I can actually agree with Nancy Grace.
We could disagree with her a lot, but when she's right.
But karma did come after Ludwig in 2018. He was trying to kidnap his ex-girlfriend and had run up to her at her car, and she turned around and fought him off, and she fatally stabbed him to death in self-defense. So again, karma's working its magic with some of these people. I wish Jamie was here. This is her favorite subject. Back to the police corruption. Now, there's a lot of things that was just too massive to cover in this. So there are a lot of other evidences of this, but I'm going to hit on some of the highlights. So Natalie's case was marred by allegations of police corruption that reportedly hampered the investigation into her disappearance. Natalie's father made specific claims about the Reuben Police Force's conduct during the investigation and in his book, which was named Corruption in Paradise. He alleged that upon arrival in Aruba, the local police force asked him, "How much money do you have?" So that would help get his child back to him. And that raised Dave's suspicions about potential corruption within the department tasked with investigating his daughter's disappearance. And originally, the first police commissioner dismissed the case, saying that she died of alcohol or drug poisoning and someone hit her body, and that there was evidence that Natalie had possession, not necessarily use, but possession of illicit drugs. And Natalie's family obviously disputes this. But it should be noted that the police commissioner was also Joran Vandersloot's godfather. And this connection was believed to have helped Joran avoid prosecution in the initial stages of the investigation and fueling suspicions of a cover-up. Dave Holloway also felt that the authorities were more concerned with protecting Aruba's reputation as a tourist destination than thoroughly investigating what happened to Natalie. He believed the police were trying to close the investigation because of concern that it would tarnish the island's image. And the Aruban government faced intense criticism for its handling of the investigation, with the allegations of corruption and lack of transparency. This damaged the island's reputation as a safe and welcoming tourist destination. In fact, many people were calling for a boycott of Aruba due to the handling of the case. But Dave specifically was against it because he said the people of Aruba, who were hardworking people and were just trying to make a living, didn't deserve that. And especially during COVID times, it was very hard on the people of Aruba. At least 80% of their income on the island comes from tourism. So without that, that's a major thing. Now, there are updates to the case, but I do want to stop here and see what my SWAC Packer's thinking. What do you really think happened to Natalie? Does anybody have any questions before we go forward?
I just have one question, Cindy, and I'm assuming the answer is no to this, but was there any surveillance video around any of those hotels? Because some of the stories were that they dropped her off at the hotels.
Yep, there was actually quite a bit of surveillance. Almost all the hotels had it. There was no surveillance that showed going to the Holiday Inn that she went in the front door. However, I don't know where her room was in the hotel, but if her room had been beachside, she might have been able to get in that without security. But it never showed her returning to the Holiday Inn. And as well as Joran's claim that they were by the Marriott, there also was no video of them in the Marriott. That is actually how Beth found Joran, was through security cameras at Carlos and Charlie's. So that's actually one thing they did have an abundance of, was security cameras.
You said there was approximately like 140-ish students on this trip?
120, yep.
Okay, 120. That's a lot of 17, 18-year-olds, but
Yes.
and with only 7 like adults, if you will. So they noticed that Natalie wasn't there like in the morning. They thought, okay, she'll come at some point. Do we know what time they were supposed to be flying out? Because you said that her parents got there within hours and they questioned the group. So I guess I'm wondering, when were they supposed to leave? Did they not go on their flights? Do you know what that day looked like?
Yeah, their flights were supposed to leave at 3 p.m. And at least currently, you need to get to the airport quite early when you leave Aruba, because you go through Aruba customs and then you go through the United States customs there. So you don't need to do anything when you get there. So you usually have to be at the airport at least 3 hours in advance. Plus they were taking tour buses. So there were like at least 2 buses of kids. So I don't think Beth was able to talk to the students like while they were still in Aruba, but I think she was able to talk to them. I don't know if any of Natalie's friends stayed back. I don't believe so. I think there was only one chaperone that stayed back. And one thing I didn't mention is that Natalie had shared a room with 2 other girls, and so that's why they noticed that she hadn't come back. However, the whole group had been like room swapping all week. And so it wasn't out of the ordinary for them not to be in their rooms, because sometimes they went to stay in someone else's room. In fact, the Holiday Inn had said their group was not welcome back because of all the room swapping and drunk teenagers, probably.
I don't think they will want to come back.
No.
I,
In fact, the podcast I listened to said at the school, there was no more big group trips. And any of the trips that they did have, they were all within the United States. They didn't really go out of the country after this.
tell me you have money without telling me you have money. You were able to, in no time, get a private jet to fly over to Aruba.
Yeah, and supposedly, as soon as Beth got the phone call, she jumped in her car and she got pulled over by a police officer because she goes, I don't care, I'm going whatever, 100 miles an hour. So the police officer that pulled her over, she sat in the car, she told him what was going on. So he gave her a police escort to wherever she was going, and then also gave her a name of an FBI friend of his. So the FBI was also involved in this case very early on. But again, this is in Aruba, different jurisdiction. And that was part of the police corruption too, is they said it should never have been handled by the Dutch or Aruban police. It should have been handled by the Hague. I don't really know what that is other than bigger government agency.
I know that one of his 7 stories that he came up with, one potentially had to do with, or this might be the one that was like overheard and recorded, had to do with sex trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
Was there any other evidence or any other circumstances that we know of Joran or his father being involved in sex trafficking at all?
Yes, actually, and this was in a podcast I listened to today, so I didn't have it in my notes, but I don't know if it was before or in between this. He actually went to Bangkok and was involved in some sex trafficking activities there. I can't remember if it was before or after this, but remember, he's only 17 when this all happened. That's still pretty darn young to be involved in that.
And that was his father or him that went?
It was him, but it was always suspected that his dad was involved in it as well. All right, guys, we are ready to start the speculation to see what we think the actual story was and what actually happened to Natalie. So, Dana, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so this is a case that I had always heard about in true crime. Like the name Natalie Holloway was just kind of something that I always just knew, and I never knew that I knew it, you know. And so once I started learning this story, it was like, oh my gosh, oh, this keeps getting bigger and bigger. And I feel like the story is somehow both clear cut and has so many questions. It's hard to describe. I don't know if I'm the only one that feels that way, but in my opinion, I feel like it was Joran that had the most to do with Natalie's disappearance and murder. I'm going to say murder because that's what I believe. In my mind, I see it as they were partying at the club together and they got her in the car under I don't know what kind of pretenses. Maybe it was, you'll get back to the hotel so much quicker, let's just drive you. Or if it was, maybe she was willing to go with them and either drink more, smoke some pot, or maybe she was willing to have sex with someone. It's hard to say. There's nothing wrong, in my opinion, with any of those options if you're a consenting of age person. The problem then becomes if you're under the influence, you can't really consent. So, in my mind, maybe he did try to slip her something in the club, like some sort of drug, and that's where he's getting the overdose from. Or if he did try to force himself on her, I, for some reason, lean towards that he did try to force himself on her and she potentially fought back. And with his recorded history of violence and anger problems, I don't know how much this person has been told no in his life. And so, with a young woman telling him no, yeah, I can pretty easily wrap my mind around that was a hairpin trigger for him. And I could almost believe that it was just like a blind red rage and that maybe he wasn't intending to kill her, but he did. I think that goes along with this Stephanie murder in Peru. He wasn't intending on killing her, but it was just that instant white hot rage, and there was nothing in his own body that could stop him. I guess that's where I go. And hiding Natalie's body, I don't have a fully formed speculation on who helped him or how he got her to be disappeared, I guess is the word to say. But I do believe somebody helped him and somebody knows something. I don't know if it was his father or if it was one of the buddies that was with him. I guess that's been something that I've always thought all along, but the corrupt police didn't help. And you're on an island where it's a different culture. That doesn't help. I just feel like there was a lot of obstacles for the family.
I think, like we've said before, we think we know who did it, but other than that, it could pretty much be anything. Missy, do you want to go next?
I would love to. The title of our show is Speculating Wildly About Crime, but for me, this is not really much of a speculation on the fact that Vandersloot is a piece of shit. I'm not even speculating it. I feel like some of his stuff, like with his changing of his story, he's constantly trying to bring attention to himself, even when no one's asking him to. I feel like he's got some sort of maybe narcissistic type tendencies where he doesn't think he's going to get caught, or he's full of himself, or some shit like that. I don't remember if he had money, but I could definitely see that being something like he just didn't think he was really going to get caught, even after he admitted it several times and got released several times, which, what the fuck? I'm really on Dana's island tonight. That's exactly what I think happened. I think that they were partying and maybe she went with them willingly, or maybe he did give her something, but I think that he was trying to get her alone in a spot and she rejected him and he did fly off the handle. I don't think that he went with the purpose of trying to murder her, but I do think he was trying to have sex with her and she said no or told him to stop, and then he killed her. And we've already saw that with that other woman. So I really think that's what happened. As for if he had help or any of that, I don't know. But what I do know is he's a piece of shit. And there's no speculation about that.
Nope, that's it for sure.
And to be clear, Missy, my island is not Aruba.
I know, my island is Aruba.
So Beth Holloway was the host of this show about vanished people, which I discovered today researching a case that I am covering in a soon episode that has the same kind of story. So I thought that was crazy that Beth actually did something as well, went on to help other families.
That's always the good out of all of these types of tragedies is when the parents take up a cause to help other people. Side note, I've always told my family that whatever I die of, no matter what it is, you better be taking up that cause. They're like, what if you die of natural causes? I don't care. You start raising money for that then. So they think I'm a little crazy, but that's okay.
Same.
Carolina, do you want to go ahead?
I will say Aruba does have a very special place in my heart as well. So I'm a little bit on your island for that, Cindy, with Aruba. I went there years ago. They also have a donkey sanctuary. Everyone should donate to that too. I went there.
Yes.
That was amazing.
I have not
But-
been there yet because no one will go with me, but it's still on my
Cindy,
to-do.
I'm your girl. It is amazing. But I'm largely on Dana and Missy's island with this one. I think what we see in so many of these cases, when it's somebody that is clearly involved, they start telling these stories and there's still like this anchor of truth in them somewhere in one of the stories. There's just that little bit that you can latch onto that this is true, but then the rest around it is a lie. And that's like a lot of what I think you need to try to figure out. And with Vandersloot, he has 7, 8 stories. So there's a lot of things that you can pull at of what the truth is there. So there's things about the sex trafficking as being a possibility. I think for me to tie my speculation to that, I would want to know more about any evidence of him being involved, his father, or somebody else in his life being involved, because he is 17. I guess people get involved in all sorts of things as teenagers, but I have a hard time without knowing more saying that's what happened. I think it's more along the lines of what Dana outlined in her speculation, that however they got her to go in their car with them, I do believe that part of the story is true. She probably was at one point in the car with Vandersloot and the two brothers. How they got her to go in the car, I think, is anyone's guess. It could be anything of what Dina was saying of, oh, let's go to this other bar, let's go to this other party. Or she was just having a good time hanging out with them and wanted to keep it going. I've done that on vacation where I meet people out at a bar and we talk and go to the next bar. So I can see that being a possibility. I think given what happens down the line and what we know about Vandersloot and the fact that he flipped a switch when Natalie's name was mentioned to the other woman that he has confessed to killing, I think it shows his tendency to violence and just part of his character. So I don't think it's a far leap to say that something similar could have happened with Natalie. And one of his stories was that they were on the beach together, and according to him, Natalie wanted to have sex, but he didn't have a condom and he just left her at the beach. I could see that story having that kernel of truth. But him, like Dana said, coming on to Natalie, her saying no, and him snapping in that moment. I think that's a distinct possibility given what we know. I don't know either about anyone else being involved. I feel like the brothers were there a lot that night, so I think there is a possibility that they know a lot more about this, and the fact that the brothers and Vandersloot were just throwing each other under the bus. I feel like there might be more that some of them know. If the brothers knew where Natalie's body was, maybe they would have said that to try to say, oh, Vandersloot told us that they put her there, but they did let them go pretty quickly. I think maybe if they had been arrested and been able to be held for that, maybe they would have came out and said something if they had been involved. I don't know where I land on whether somebody else was involved, but Vandersloot was 17 years old. Natalie has never been found on a very small, geographically wise island. My thought is that he had some help in disappearing her, and I do think, unfortunately, that she is probably deceased at this time, and I definitely think that Vandersloot is responsible for that.
He's basically had some kernel of truth in all of his stories, I think. All right, David, are you ready with your speculation?
So I made columns of what I love and what I hate. There's two things I love, so I want to save that for last. What I don't love is, to piggyback off of what Carolina was saying, I think out of all of 7 or 8 stories, there's pieces of truth. The example I had written down is the condom story. I do not think that he rejected her because he did not have a condom. I think she rejected him because he did not have a condom, and that is what triggered him, leading to her demise. So I think there's little pieces of that in every story. What I noticed is he was able to maintain a good lie, a good bunch of lies, until after the passing of his father. And then time passed until he was with his second victim, Stephanie. Her body was found in 3 days, and within no time, he was like, yeah, I did it. So I felt like the foundation that he had was no longer as sturdy when his father passed. I don't know what role his father played in it. However, I think that there is a connection there. So with friend John, I know that we want to say karma when he tried to attack his ex-girlfriend or his girlfriend and she stabbed him or whatever. I'm glad that she got out of that alive, but it breaks my heart for her because there's still so much that was stolen from her. She doesn't get to just wash her hands and say, I survived and walk on. And that devastates me for her.
Yeah, absolutely.
It also devastates me for, I don't know how we could have prevented Natalie's passing with her being the first victim that we know of as far as leading to death. I do feel that there were probably victims of things that maybe led up to that. Maybe it was date rape, whatever. We don't know that. I'm just saying, I feel like you don't go from good guy to murder. But I feel like so much could have happened that could have prevented Stephanie Flores from being murdered if there wasn't the corruption. And that devastates me for her and her family. The last thing I have on my hate list is, have y'all heard of the gay panic defense? When someone is like, oh, the gay guy hit on me and I freaked out and it led to me killing him. I feel like that happens with victim blaming as well. It just doesn't get noted as that. And I feel like that is exactly what is happening in this case. It's, well, she got in the car with 3 guys. She did it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't fucking matter. If it is, as we've all said and agree on, if it is consensual adults, it doesn't freaking matter. And I hate the victim blaming that has taken place in this, as if it's any kind of justification. The things that I do love is watching the documentary that Dave, her dad, did years ago. You know how people, they want to protect their loved ones, they want to protect the victim, right? And so they will either avoid questions or find ways to fluff answers. And he was very real. And he was like, I don't love that she got in the car with 3 guys. She was on vacation. She was young. She was innocent. He did not steer away from that. And he did not victim blame with that. And I fucking love that. I love her family. I have a crush on her brother, Matt, who's so cute. Her mom is amazing. Her dad is amazing. And the work that they're doing is amazing. But I really appreciated that they did not try to steer away from the things that led her to her demise, because it wasn't her fault. And I think that's all I have to say. But
To your point, David, though, I do appreciate you saying that about her dad, because you can say, yeah, that was dumb. She shouldn't have gotten in a car with 3 men that she doesn't know. But it also shouldn't be a death sentence. It's like both can be true at the same time. That's crazy.
So one thing in a few of the podcasts I listened to too, Bjorn was at the casino with Natalie and a lot of her classmates for the whole week. So while he still was a stranger on vacation, he had put himself in the group for all week. Natalie and her friend said, hey, we're going to be at the bar tonight. Do you want to come join us? And he said, no, I can't. I have school in the morning. Then he changed his mind and brought his buddies. It was definitely consensual as far as her going with them, but it was somebody that she had spent all week with and thought he was fine. So again, not at all her fault, but he had laid that layer of trust for her.
Doesn't that sound like he purposely then was like targeting her versus, oh, we just met this night and then got drunk and then we wanted to keep partying?
But I think that can go to the whole, like, why the rejection was that much worse, because you hear it all the time, even at a bar, and a guy buys a woman 1 drink and then she says thank you and that's it. And
They get so
what?
mad.
You're just a bitch. You're gonna take my drink.
They get really mad when you
Much
tell
like-
them you have a boyfriend. It's funny.
Yeah. So I could definitely see. I spent all week trying to get in this woman's pants, and now
Yeah.
the last night she's here, she's gonna say no to me.
Yeah.
All right, Janelle, what is yours?
I don't know that there's much left to say. I think we're all on SWAC Island tonight, and it is lovely. I was going to bring up the casino as well, because it's not a question in my mind that she went with him willingly, because to your point, like, he wasn't a stranger that she had just met that night at the bar. So whatever they said to entice her, or maybe they didn't even have to entice her. Maybe she wanted to go have one more night on the beach. But much like what everybody else said, whether it was she got uncomfortable or maybe she was too drunk and started feeling sick and wanted to go back, I think she tried to get herself out of that situation. And that's when the switch flipped and it just went tragically wrong. And I think she's in the water. There didn't have to be all of these elaborate stories. I think this was him toying with the police and then also in turn toying with the family, which is so disgusting. And we know that he was okay with that because he extorted them when it was still lies. I think the brothers probably helped whether they wanted to or not, almost like a wrong place, wrong time for them as well. I do think it's really odd that he didn't try any of his tricks on Stephanie. Like, why confess pretty quickly in that one? It's so off brand for him.
Yeah. The only thing I'll say with that is they were in a poker tournament together, and then they went back to his room that was in his name. So maybe he just assumed he couldn't get out of it at that point. Seems like he couldn't have gotten out of Natalie either. He still did.
I think she's in the water, and that's why nobody can say we know exactly where she is, or we can take you to the remains, or
And some of the remains, at least some, were cremated, correct? Or did they find that none of her was cremated, it belonged to animals?
Yeah, so John, while they were digging her up, he took some of her bones and kept them as trophies. So when they brought him to the FBI to be tested, 2 of them were for sure animal bones, and there were 2 others that they weren't sure of. And for whatever reason, the police wouldn't test all of them, so they gave them to Dave to test through his group. So of the 2, one came back again as animal. The second one came back as potentially a human bone, but it was not Natalie's. But then the other question was, great, then whose was it then? Like, why don't they ever follow that up? So why don't we put that in GEDmatch or something so at least another family can have some type of closure?
It's an island that's 21 miles from first point to bottom point, right? So if you know somebody who has a crematorium, am I saying that
Yep,
right?
crematorium. Yep.
Crematorium, you probably know somebody that has a boat. So to get out into the water,
or even just to put her body in the water.
that's what I'm saying. Like,
You don't even
know,
have to do the extra homework.
So my speculation is pretty much right in line with all of you guys's as well, that Yarn was definitely a jerk of a guy. And Natalie probably was excited her last night in Aruba, wanted to spend the night with him in whatever way, could have been just talking, but wanted to enjoy the last night on the beach and went with him willingly. There maybe have been rumors that there was some date rape drug involved as well, but I still feel like for the most part, she probably went with him. And I feel like something happened where he was just not happy with her and somehow killed her. And then again, I'm not exactly sure what he did with her body. He would have had to taken it out in a boat because the water is so very clear that you can see right to the bottom. And things can wash up pretty quickly if it's not out far enough. I'm not exactly sure how he killed her, or one of his stories said she was convulsing, so maybe that happened. There was another story of his that said that she was falling asleep on the drive up to the lighthouse, so maybe it didn't happen. And maybe it was accidental death. But again, all of the stories could be true and none of them can be true. I'm right on the same Caribbean island as the rest of you, is that Yarn's definitely had something to do with it. One of his friends may have had something to do with it. I'm not sure if it was the brothers or if it was his dad or others. There was the one that was arrested in the Netherlands. And then one of his stories mentioned a friend that took care of the body, but they never connected that was the same person. So maybe that was, if they both were kids of Aruban politicians, that would have been really part of the police corruption where they both would have been okay to feel like their dads would have bailed them out of trouble. Yeah, that's pretty much my speculation. Unlike in other cases, We do have a little bit of resolution, and then there are some updates to this case as well. So let me go through that as well as some other things that we'll close it out with. So in May of 2023, Peru agrees to temporarily extradite Vandersloot to the US to face the extortion and fraud charges that he would face after serving his sentence for Flores' murder. So then in June, he's arraigned in federal court in Birmingham, Alabama on those charges. But it wasn't until October of 2023, nearly 18 years after Natalie's disappearance, that Vandersloot finally confessed to killing her. As part of his plea deal, he admitted to striking Natalie in the head with a cinder block on the beach after she rejected his sexual advances and then disposed of her body in the ocean. So we actually have his full taped confession. I did want to add a trigger warning here for this confession. It does talk about Natalie's brutal murder. So feel free to skip ahead about 2 minutes, 35 seconds if you do not want to hear this.
Plus, she asked to go back to her hotel, but I was just trying to get dropped off a little bit further away from her hotel so we could walk back to her hotel and I might still get a chance to be with her.
Okay.
That's what I was hoping for.
Okay. So what happens?
Yeah, Deepak drops me off at a place a little right of the Marriott hotel known as the Fisherman's Huts. This place is not so far from the next hotel is the Marriott, and the next hotel after that is another Marriott, which is a timeshare, and then it's the Holiday Inn. We walk along the beach.
Do Deepak and Satish get out? We have to say that.
Deepak and Satish leave. They leave. They go back to their home. They get in their car and they leave. I'm actually with Natalie walking along the beach. I find a space before we get to the Marriott hotel, where I lay her down. We lay down together in the sand, and we start kissing each other. I get her to kiss me again. We start kissing each other, and I start feeling her up again. And she tells me no. She tells me she doesn't want me to feel her up. I insist. I keep feeling her up either way. She knees me. She ends up kneeing me in the crotch. When she knees me in the crotch, I get up on the beach and I kick her extremely hard in the face. Yeah, she's laying down unconscious, possibly even dead, but definitely unconscious. And I see right next to her, there's a huge cinder block laying on the beach.
When you say cinder block, looking at the walls of this place, is it like those?
The exact same cinder blocks. I see a huge cinder block laying on the beach. I take this and I smash her head in with it completely. Yeah, her face basically collapses in. Even though it's dark, I can see her face is collapsed in. Afterwards, I don't exactly know what. I'm scared. I don't know what to do, and I decide to take her and to put her into the ocean. So I grab her and I half pull and half walk with her into the ocean. I push her off. I walk up to about my knees into the ocean and I push her off sea. And yeah, after that I get out. I walk home.
This still seems like a lie, even though he said this was his truth, because they brought the Dutch Marines in to look for the shores of the ocean, and the water is crystal clear, and then you could see to the bottom. My husband went parasailing, and it would have been right over this beach area, and he said even up high he could see the fish swimming in the water. It is so clear.
First of all, that made me so uncomfortable, maybe the most uncomfortable I've been since we started SWAC. But I actually bought that. I don't know what shark activity is, but we know she's bleeding. Could that just have increased the amount of shark/fish activity that disposed of her body?
You remember his first story said that she wanted to see sharks. And so she was going to go up to the tip of the island to see them. Obviously, there's sharks in the ocean, and they are on this side of the island. However, they're more frequent on the other side of the island that's nearest Venezuela, because Supposedly that's where they dump their trash. The sharks are usually more plentiful on the other side. But I agree that if he would have gotten her out far enough, but with the tides and things, that's where I think he had to have had help at that point to get her out farther on a boat. But now remember, the Marines were there less than 24 hours. So if he just went knee deep into that water, that would have been hard.
I don't believe the whole knee deep thing. And one of the things that turned my stomach when I first heard him saying that she wanted to go see the sharks, I feel like that's another like kernel of truth. And
Right.
I feel like that's almost that narcissistic trait of fuck you. And I don't know that she said I want to see the sharks one more time before I go. I think that he took her to a place where she could be fed to sharks, and how he was fucking with the family and the people involved was, oh, she said she wanted to see the sharks one more time before she went, and I gave her wish.
Yeah, and I agree with that too. Just what you said, that's a very good point. That when he said she wanted to see the sharks, other part that confuses me though is, so if he hit her in the head with a cinder block and then she's bleeding, this is white sand beaches that they're on. How is that not noticed? And where did that cinder block go? His shoes were missing, so we know if he did go out into the water, that was why. But where's the blood? And again, they were searching the next day for her. Now, I don't know if they would have went. He said he was down at Marriott, which is like 2 hotels down from where she stayed, but you'd think it's all the same beach, like it's all open beaches area. So that's the part that I'm not super excited about
And
in
here's
this
my
story.
thing. He, in one story, mentioned that she was trying to get out of the car and she fell and hit her head. Maybe that's true. So then maybe they went down to the beach and laid down because she wasn't feeling well. Then he tried to become sexual with her and she's, I don't feel good. Like, there doesn't have to be blood. I just fucking hit my head. I'm drunk. You know what I mean? And then he's trying to instigate sex and there's no condom or whatever. But that leads me to the cinder block thing, right? Maybe he noticed a cinder block. Maybe that cinder block was tied to her, and that's how the cinder block fell into his story. So there's kernels of each story that were true.
This man is a psychopath, so I'm not supposed to know how his brain works. But I just think if I had to give a confession, and if that was the case, then why not just say, like he said, he kicked her in the face and she was passed out, possibly dead. Like, why wouldn't you just leave it at that? But to go that step further to say, I took this cinder block and it collapsed her face, like, why even add that?
Cindy, you've been on this beach. One, how early do people get to this beach? Because, yeah, they were looking for her already less than 24 hours, but if there's only 2 hours in between when she was killed and when people were arriving to the beach, yeah, there's probably still blood in the sand.
People get up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning to get their spot by the beach, which I've never done. I'm not getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to sit by the beach. I will sit by the pool if I have to. But anyway, they get up 5 o'clock in the morning sometimes to go down there. Plus, it's hot in Aruba all the time. So people go jogging and all of that stuff early in the morning. So I know I'm not jogging that early in the morning either. But they do that to beat the heat.
Is against that 100%.
The other thing is, now I started going in 2015, so 10 years after this happened. But there are people literally hired to sweep the sidewalk so they keep all the sand on the sand beach. There are people that go sifting through the sand to clean it. In January this year, they don't have hurricanes there, but they had like gale force winds that brought in a ton of seaweed into the shore. All of the hotel staff were out on the beaches clearing up the seaweed so that they would still be sand beaches. So I have a hard time believing that if there was a bloody cinder block with a pile of blood, that they wouldn't have been jumping on that and been cleaning it up.
Well, is it possible that a cinder block is also within not arm's reach, but close enough that
Yeah, because sometimes they use those to prop up like their advertisement signs. Right through there, you can rent jet skis and water toys and blah, blah, blah. So they have a ton of signs and things like that. They also have showers to wash your feet off before you go into the pool or into the hotel area.
And I could be wrong. I have not bled or committed crimes in sand, but I feel like I've dropped margaritas and martinis in the sand, and there could be 15 droplets, but they clump together because of the sand. So wouldn't it be easy if there was blood or blood splatter to scoop up enough to throw it into the water? And it's not like it's on a carpet.
Yeah, that could be.
Been disposed of, maybe.
What if after, so they've obviously had an altercation where she has kneed him, he has kicked her in the face, if what he says is true. What if by that time they had shifted to where they are closer to the water? I don't know what the tide situation is, but if that could have helped the cleanup.
What if he didn't hit her on the sand? He hit her while she was like really close to the water. That's really smart. He could have left things out of the story too. Like he could have drug her closer to the water. And then again, just bits and pieces of a story that he's telling here and leaving more things out.
That's the reason I asked like how early people get there, because even with the sand being able to be washed away or scooped away, he still had to do a lot of other things in that meantime. But it makes sense what you're saying.
Yeah, it's just hard to tell what exactly happened. And I will not be surprised if this was his 10th story, if there ends up to be more. And I do have a little bit more of this story, though, to talk about. So he had also pled guilty to the extortion and wire fraud charges and is sentenced to 20 years in U.S. prison to be served concurrently with his existing Peruvian sentence. So he's already served at this point 11 years of his 28 years for Peruvian prison. So he'll serve another 17 in Peru, and then he'll serve an additional 3 years in U.S. prison. But the statute of limitations on murder in Aruba is 12 years. That has long since passed in Natalie's case. So real justice for Natalie may never be had. But a side note, as we were talking about the Peruvian jail, they do allow conjugal visits. While he is in jail in 2014, he gets married and ends up getting her pregnant, and he has a baby girl. So that marriage lasted 9 years before he dumps that wife for a new girlfriend. And then at some point in this, he's also sentenced to more time in Peru for selling drugs in the prison. And breaking news, yesterday, as we were recording this on April 10th, Joran was attacked by 2 inmates while in the common area of the prison. He only suffered bruises and lacerations, but one of the National Penitentiary Institute officials said that people really want him dead. So we will see if he ends up serving his full sentence in Peruvian jail. So one other thing I wanted to mention, as we were talking about Beth and the other things that she has done, she's part of 2 different organizations. She has a crime museum. She's teamed up with them, which is also part of the Natalie Holloway Resource Center. So she talks about other crimes as well and other resources. She also talks about, you are college campuses or high school students, about traveling safe and other tips to keep everyone safe. And then she is also as part of this Student and Youth Travel Association, which all have links to these as well in our show notes, about just a reminder to put your safety first when you're traveling. So this first picture here is, of course, of Natalie on the dance team. And then this picture is of Beth. And as I said, this case had a little bit of everything. We had celebrities, and it had something for all of our SWAC pack. We had police corruption for Jamie. She went to bed on her own island if she had been with us tonight. And we had a hotel-related case for Janelle. We had Peyton Manning for David. We had a nefarious main suspect for Missy. And lots of different laws to understand for Carolina, and a relatively small community for Dana. And for me, it's my favorite vacation spot. So as you can see, this case has far-reaching consequences, significantly damaging Aruba's reputation and tourism industry, while also contributing to an increase in the island's overall crime rate. The Natalee Holloway case has been a long, complex, and frustrating saga, marked by numerous twists and turns, shifting stories from the main suspect, and a lack of closure for Natalee's family. The Aruban government's perceived mishandling of the investigation, along with the statute of limitation issues, has made it extremely difficult to hold Joran van der Sloot accountable for Natalee's death in Aruba. All we can do is continue to analyze the facts, weigh the various theories, and speculate wildly about the possibilities.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to our show today. We genuinely appreciate any and all support. We would love if you would please subscribe, like, comment, or download on any of your favorite platforms that you go to for podcasts. Did today's episode leave you with more to say, or have a theory that we didn't discuss, or even a case that you'd love to hear us talk about? Head on over to our Facebook discussion group. You can search SWAC Pod, SWACPOD discussion group, and leave any suggestions, comments, etc. there. To feel a little bit more comfortable via email, we can also be reached at swacpod@gmail.com. That's SWACPOD@gmail.com. Any and all feedback is incredibly helpful to us. And until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and keep speculating wildly.